All right, so welcome everyone to another session sponsored by the Center for Teaching Excellence here at Southern Illinois University Carbondale. I'm Dr. Craig Ingstrom, but you can just call me Craig. Today we have our second session with Paul Hila. He'll tell you, I'll introduce him, but he can tell you a little bit more about himself if I miss anything. This is a series of topics on instructional design and assessment in D2L. Last week's session covered the topic of your basic sort of instructional design. I believe he'll cover just a quick overview of that and then move into more of an assessment at the course level, and then finally conclude next week with another session on assessing more at the program level and how D2L can facilitate this and make our lives easier in terms of accreditation requirements and so forth. If you missed last week's session, that's not a problem. I think you can follow along quite well. And if you missed next week's session, that's okay. I will take all of these videos and put them onto YouTube so that we have a playlist that you can always go back to. Before we get into the session, I do want to highlight a few things. First, I just want to note that if you are interested in exploring with us a Scantron replacement, basically there are softwares out there, even by the company Scantron, that will allow you to digitize exam taking. You could print bubble sheets directly from a computer or get them from the CTE and then have the exam administered in class and then collect those and bring them back to the CTE, or actually just use any scanner on campus to scan them. They would go into a cloud-based environment where you could then look at them before deploying them to D2L, sort of streamlining that process. Again, we're just at the exploration phase. So if you're interested, scan the QR code or follow the link that I'll place later in the chat. So again, if you're in the exam space, this is something that you might want to use. I also think it's a great tool for things like assessments in courses that you could use in a variety of ways. We will record that session if you're unable to attend it on April 26th. Also note that later today at 1 p.m. we have a tool. It's again, a product demonstration. We demoed it in the fall. It had a lot of interest. And I want to just say that this is also a great video platform for assessment. This basically turns any video into an engaging environment where you could do things like quizzes right in the video environment. So feel free to check out that at 1 p.m. later today. I'll put the link again in the chat. And finally, just as a reminder, next week we will have a follow-up to this session focusing more on program outcomes and learning competencies for units, for example, for schools. So that'll be next week. I will again place in the chat. So with that said, if you could attend those sessions, that would be great. If not, as always, I'll record them. Let's go ahead and get to today's session. I would like to introduce you Paul Hila. He is a Toronto-based D2L enablement coach. Basically, we have a subscription with D2L that gives us some time with him every week, and we can do trainings or we can do course audits and reviews or a wide range of things. If your program is looking for help in any way, reach out to me and maybe there will be some time I can assign you with Paul. He's been just greatly valuable to a lot of us here in the CTE and programs. He does have a background in English literature and visual studies. He's taught at in schools. He has a master's in teaching. He is TESOL certified, and he's been working in the e-learning content development space for over 3 years as a learning coach, as a content developer, and now with D2L. So thank you for joining us today, Paul. Really look forward to hearing what you have to show us about using D2L as an assessment tool.
Yeah, thank you very much, Craig, for that introduction. And thank you for everyone for attending today's session. I won't take up more of your time with my intro. I think Craig covered the basics, but I just want to recap. Last week's session was on learning objectives, what learning objectives are, how to write effective learning objectives, and how to associate those objectives to assessments within the course, and then how to track those objectives within Brightspace. And in this session, we're going to look at best practices for assessment tools. So I'm going to share my screen. Right. Let me know if you can see my screen. So the agenda for today is we'll start with some things to think about when you're developing your assessment strategy. Then we'll move into what tools are available to create assessments in Brightspace. We'll talk about some best practices for using those tools, and then we'll have a Q&A session in the end. If you do have questions during the presentation, feel free to drop them in the chat or raise your hand. I don't believe I can see the chat while I'm in presentation mode and share screening. So Craig, if you can monitor the chat and let me know if there's questions, that would be great.
Awesome, I'm on it.
Thank you. And yeah, let's get started. So developing your assessment strategy. So let's look at, so ideally you have your learning objectives and learning outcomes created and designed already. So now the next phase is to create your assessments that will evaluate those learning objectives and outcomes. So these are some things for you to keep in mind when you do get started on assessment design. So the first thing is the course facilitated or is it self-paced? So the answer to this question will give you a better sense of what tools are more appropriate to use when the course has a moderator versus when a course doesn't have a moderator. And so the next thing is, does the course have start and fixed end dates? Or is it a rolling enrollment type of course? Again, some features that these assessment tools have are better for rolling enrollment versus if it's a cohort based with fixed start and end dates. And of course, is the course fully online or blended? Next, let's look at the three main categories of assessments. So we have diagnostic assessments, we have formative assessments, and summative assessments. So diagnostic assessments, as you know, gauge learners' existing knowledge on a given topic or concept. They're good for personalizing the learning experience based on the data that the instructor collects on the learner profile and what the learner needs and interests are. They can be used to release targeted content, and we'll talk a little bit about release conditions, which is a feature that you can use with assessments. And they can be used to apply data to course reviews if you're using an end of course survey to collect data on how learners like the course or the overall learning experience, online learning experience in Brightspace. The next type of assessment is formative assessment. So these allow learners to check their understanding, their knowledge and understanding. These are non-graded. So these are low stakes. They provide feedback about performance and knowledge gaps and increase learner engagement and motivation. And lastly, summative assessments. These are graded. So the summative assessments are tied to the gradebook, and they are high stakes because they measure learner performance. As I said, they're graded, but they also assess achievement against the competencies or the learning objectives that have been defined for the course. Excuse me. So before we get into types of assessments in Brightspace, it's always a good idea to use a content map like this one on the screen to align your learning objectives with your assessments. So if we're using backward design to design our courses, you start ideally with the goal in mind, which is what the learning objectives are for the course, and then designing learning objectives outcomes at a modular level. And then the next phase would be to design your assessments, and you want to make sure that your assessments are appropriately evaluating the learning objectives and outcomes for the course. And a content map is a good way to keep track of that. All right, so next we'll move into assessments in Brightspace, making tools available in Brightspace. These are some questions to think about when you're using some of the tools that Brightspace has to offer, like the assignments tool. How can you go beyond the traditional essay and written reports? using the rubrics tool, where can you pull in rubrics, the analytic rubric tool that Brightspace offers in your course to facilitate assignment and discussion grading. And the quizzes tool, how can you leverage your quizzes to tackle multiple levels of Bloom's taxonomy? And we will hopefully we'll generate some answers to these questions as we progress throughout this presentation. So creating meaningful assessments, practice activities and assessments should be relevant. This is a cliche at this point, but when you're designing assessment, you want to ensure that the assessments are authentic, they're aligned to the learning objectives. And in doing that, you want to incorporate as many scenarios as you can. You want to bring in applied examples and case studies. You want to make sure the experience is interactive, which is what assessments bring to the table. And then you want to select the appropriate tools for those assessments. And Brightspace, as we will look at shortly, offers a variety of tools that you can use. For example, if you want learners to show general understanding of content, for example, identifying key examples, key stages in a process, or checking their knowledge and understanding, then the quiz tool might be the most appropriate tools. That includes auto-graded, a variety of auto-graded questions that you can also release feedback. If you want learners to, sorry, Craig.
Yes.
I'm just noticing, am I sharing the screen with my notes on them?
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is okay. It's helpful to see. Yeah.
Is it okay?
Yeah, you can change it. Yeah, either way.
Either way? All right.
Yeah. I think it's kind of nice. We can go back and read some of the things you highlighted. So.
Okay, great. I'll keep it like this. So if you want learners to practice writing a report, then you might consider a written assignment that allows them to practice the skill. And then you can provide, obviously, you can use the built-in annotation tool to provide comments and feedback. And then if you want learners to practice some of their communication skills or other soft skills, there's the discussion tool that can allow some collaboration within the course, peer review as well, but also the video assignment is a great tool that you can leverage for that. So let's move into the diagnostic assessments and what tools are available to create diagnostic assessments in the course. So diagnostic assessments, they're used, you can use them at the outset of the course or at the end of the course. So if you're using a survey, you want to know what learners already know about a topic. You want to know more about collect information about your learner profile, what their interests are, what their needs are, what their goals are, etc. The tools available for this diagnostic purpose are the survey tool, the checklist tool, and the quiz tool. The survey tool and the checklist tool, these are non-graded tools, whereas the quiz tool, you have the option to tie it to a grade book or not. So in this case, obviously, it's non-graded. And of course, you can attach release conditions to these tools. Just a note, I will go deeper into release conditions in the next session, where I cover some of the more advanced features that Brightspace has to offer. Yeah, Craig, I see your hands up.
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to maybe help sort of situate folks in this session with the next session. So one thing to keep in mind is for programs. So if you're really interested more in that programmatic assessment, you have to also think about how are you going to deploy the assessments within each course and even standardize that across potentially other courses, because what we're trying to avoid for you, if you need, for example, back-end analytics really quickly, like how did our students perform across the curriculum, it makes it easier, and it's almost actually necessary for you all to have it sort of set up correctly at all of these tool levels, because then we have good data on the back end. It's kind of that principle of garbage in, garbage out. So for those here more for that third session, this will be helpful for you to think about how to design actual assessments in the specific courses. And I'm glad you're going to cover the release conditions, but just to kind of situate that for people too, is again, as a reminder, if you didn't make the first session, you can be assessing but not grading. And there are a variety of ways that you can show that students earn competency. For example, here's one example I use in one of my courses. They take an exam, but if they don't score above a 70% or higher, then it releases to them another activity that they can try to develop to improve their competency. So I just wanted to give a couple of examples as we move forward to be thinking about that with what Paul has to show. Sorry for going for so long.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you for that, Greg. And so yeah, in using surveys, there's several use cases. So you want to determine learners' prior knowledge with the topics and the content and the content in the course. Gather feedback, use it for self-assessment and self-reflection purposes, or gauge class participation. Like Craig says, you could use release conditions based on the student performance on a diagnostic assessment, but I should note that the survey is non-graded. So the best tool to use there would be the quiz tool if you want to add a release condition based on a specific based on a performance or an overall grade. So some best practices around survey use is keep them short. Generally, questions should be fairly straightforward and not overcomplicated. Students should take about more or less 5 minutes to complete the survey. You have the option to add feedback to questions, but with surveys, because there is no right or wrong answers, you could add feedback, and that feedback is available when students are taking the survey. So when they're responding to the questions, they can select to reveal that feedback. You have the option to make surveys anonymous or not, but you want to make sure that, so you want to be 100% sure when you're selecting this option, because there is no way of going back. So once this option is selected, once you make the survey anonymous, it's not reversible. And if you do decide to make the survey anonymous, it suppresses the display of any user data in the survey results. So you will see the survey results, but you will not see you will not see any association to the learner who submitted those results. And another thing to keep in mind is that you can create so the types of questions that are available with the survey tool. You can create multiple choice, multiple select, ordering, fill in the blanks, short answer. More or less, there's the same type of questions that are available in the quiz tool and in the self-assessment tool. You can create these questions in the question library, and you can create a section within the question library titled surveys, and you have all those questions in there. And then when you go in to create your survey, you can pull those questions directly into the survey. And in this case, like I said, if you want to incentivize students or make the survey mandatory, you could add release conditions where where content is released. So let's say the next module or the content for the course will be released once students have completed and submitted the survey, the course intro survey. So the next tool that you can use for diagnostic purposes is the checklist tool. This is more limited in terms of what questions you can create. It's basically, you can create true and false, maybe multiple choice. With the checklist tool, this is non-graded. You can't tie it to a grade book. The one cool thing with the checklist tool is that you can use it to to personalize content or differentiate instruction, in the sense that with the checklist, you can add release conditions at the checklist item level. So if you do notice, for example, that there is some knowledge gaps based on learner responses, you can release content specific to the learner's needs and those knowledge gaps or interests. So if a student has limited knowledge of a certain topic, you can release additional resources to them. And checklists can also be used to highlight expectations or keep students organized within the course by listing list of to-do items, which can be used at the outset, at the beginning of the course, or at the beginning of the module, or at the end of the module. So those are the two tools that I'm going to cover as far as diagnostic assessments go. Next, we'll move into formative assessments. Okay, so formative assessments are used throughout the course to do the following. So guide student learning, reinforce student learning, and engage student knowledge. The following tools can be used to administer formative assessments. So these are the self-assessment tool, the Bongo video assignments tool, and ungraded discussions and quizzes. So like I said, the self-assessment is non-graded, so there is no option to add that to the gradebook. The Bongo video assignments, that offers an option, non-graded or graded option, and both the discussion and the quizzes tool can be graded or non-graded. So some use cases for using the self-assessment tool. You can, like I said, you can use similar types of questions like the survey tool or the quiz tool. These are true and false, multiple choice, short answer, long answer types of questions. You can use these to assess, for students to self-assess their own progress throughout the course, or as a way to reflect on their learning throughout the course. You can use it as a way to check student knowledge and understanding without the pressure of having it be graded, so it's low stakes. And like the survey tool, there are no right or wrong answers in the assessment tool, but you can provide feedback which is available to students when they take the self-assessment. With the self-assessment, you can also add hints if you want to guide students to the right answer. You can add tips. Like I said, you can add formative feedback along the way to guide them to the desired result. You can provide feedback at the option level, and you can provide feedback at the overall level. And then lastly, you can also use the Bongo video assignment tool as a way to assess students, as a way of formative assessment. The Bongo video assignment offers different types of assessments. So you have the interactive video assignment, which is, students watch a video, and then there's quiz questions integrated within that video, either at the end of the video, there's a knowledge check, or they're integrated along the video to check their understanding of the content. There's other types of assignments you can use the Bongo video for, like the question and answer assignment, which is used for students to apply their knowledge on the spot with a limited time frame, which the instructor determines. This is good for oral quizzes, checking understanding, skill demonstration, interview practice, or language practice. There's also the individual video assignment. with the auto analysis feature enabled. So the individual video assignment allows students to upload or record as many draft videos as they want before they submit their good copy. The neat feature is that there is this auto analysis feature built in, which can be used to provide automated feedback. So students receive a grade based on their speech clarity, filler words, and speaking rate. And then they can use that feedback to improve on their presentation. And then there is also a peer review feature within the Bongo tool, which is optional, and I will talk about later on in upcoming slides. So next we'll jump into summative assessments and evaluating learner performance. So summative assessments, so these are types of assessments that are obviously graded and they're tied to the gradebook. So they're for marks, they're used at the end of a unit of learning to measure learner performance. The following tools can be used. So the quizzes can be used. You can use the discussions tool, the assignments tool, and the Bongo video assignments tool. So let's get into the quizzes tool a little bit. So the quizzes tool can be used for graded knowledge checks. You can use this at the end of a unit to check student knowledge, or at the end of a course. You can use this to create midterms and final exams. And you can also incorporate case studies within quiz questions. Now, quizzes do have quite a few features that you're able to customize and play around with. So, whether you want to allow learners to return to a previous page, so you want to enable this feature so that they can go back and revisit some of the questions they've answered if they want to change some of the responses. You want to include a variety type question types depending on what you want students to demonstrate. So you can also you can align learning outcomes to individual quiz questions. So depending on what the learning outcome is, you will determine what type of quiz question serves a better use case. You can use other media in questions, so you can insert images, graphics, you can insert videos, etc., to create more engaging assessments. And there is the option to use the question enumeration. This is often unnecessary, especially if you're shuffling the question options. So you want to make sure that you disable this if you opt for shuffling the responses to a question, because they will be out of order. And then there is, you want to think about once a student has finished the quiz, you want to think about once they've published what kind of results the learner is able to see after they've completed and published their quiz, and submitted their quiz. So there's several options. So there you can display their overall grade. You can show which questions you want to make visible to students after they've submitted, or so you can show the questions that they got correct, or you can show all of the questions. You can show incorrect questions only with the learner responses. You can show correct questions only with learner responses. So those are some of the options. You can also release class average or grade distribution. So something to keep in mind related to quizzes and academic integrity. Here. So when a quiz has a certain availability window, some students will complete the quiz before others. And if the correct answers are auto-published, this can pose an issue if students share those correct answers with each other. So you want to be mindful of what students are able to view after they've submitted a quiz. So one suggestion is to set the submission view to release later, so that, for example, once they've submitted the quiz, they can only see their overall grade, and after the due date has passed, the quiz due date has passed, you can release all the questions together with the feedback. Like I said, you can randomize questions and response option order. You can use question pools. So if you want to, this is another strategy to sort of to ensure that academic integrity is maintained. And so you can create a question pool and then select, let's say, a question pool out of 30 questions and select 20 of those questions from those 30. So each time the quiz is administered, it pulls 20 questions randomly. So there's variety of questions, and those questions are being recycled. So not every quiz is the same. Other options to reduce the likelihood of academic integrity breaches: disable right-click, disable email instant messages and alerts, that students can't communicate, or this is always a good idea, is to enforce a time limit, especially if this is midterm exam or final exam. So when thinking about when you're creating quiz questions, these are some best practices. So ensure that each question measures a specified learning outcome. So like I said, the quiz tool does have the feature where you can associate a learning outcome with a quiz question, or you can associate them with the overall quiz with all the questions. Make sure that the vocabulary is clear and the question is simple and not confusing for students. Avoid information that's not necessary, so learners understand the question, or that you're not disclosing information within the question that gives away the correct response. Style and wording is consistent as possible across content and assessments. Questions don't exhibit bias. 4 options is ideal for multiple choice types of questions. And if using all of the above, change your question to multi-select. So if all of the above is an option within a multiple choice question, you want students to get that question correct, even if they select those correct options. Next, we'll talk a little bit about the question library, but I mentioned this briefly. So the question library is a space where you can create all of your questions before you've actually gone in and created and set up these assessments. So you can categorize the question library into sections. So like I said, you can have a section with survey questions, a section with quiz questions. You can categorize them based on type of assessment, whether they're midterm quiz questions or final exam types of questions. You can reuse the same questions on multiple assessments. And I talked about this, but it's a good way to also create question pools using questions from the question library to mitigate some integrity concerns. Like I said, you can create sections to better organize your questions. You can choose shuffle questions in this section so that the order changes every time you're pulling questions from the question library. And you can provide section text to set the scene or provide some background on the set of questions. And I talked about the question library, so we'll move into the next slide. So here we see a mapping of question types across Bloom's taxonomy of cognitive ability. So we have remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, create. Different types of questions. At the top here, we see true and false, multiple select, multiple choice, multiple select, long answer, short answer, fill in the blanks, matching, ordering, or you can use MathML to create equations. So different types of questions can assess various cognitive abilities from low to high order thinking. Some questions have more range. So for example, the multiple choice question can measure several cognitive abilities from low to medium. So depending on the type of question you're answering, the type of question you're creating, you can assess their ability, students' ability to remember, understand, apply, and analyze. Long answer questions fall more on the higher order thinking scale. You can see here the long answer can be used to for learners to apply what they've learned, analyze, evaluate, create, and etc. So next we'll move. Yeah, sir. Yeah, go ahead, Craig. I see your hand.
Yeah, sure. I was hoping that, during this session, you could actually show us some of the sandbox examples. Maybe this is will be a recap of some of the stuff covered last week. Because I think, we get a general sense of the good instructional design, but I think it'd be better or more helpful for attendees to see how you actually are connecting some of these things into the D2L dashboards. Yeah, so if we're doing, for example, a formative assessment, how would I actually connect that in D2L? I know we covered this a little bit last week, but I was hoping we could cover that the last 20 minutes.
Yeah, so just so I'm clear on your question, how to connect the assessment to learning objectives, or?
Correct. Yeah. So let's say I do set up an exam, right? I need to make sure that folks here know how to connect the questions, because you mentioned, for example, that you could have a question specifically tied to a assessment item. I think it would be helpful for us to see how we actually connect that.
Right. Okay. I can pause here and open up my sandbox and show you how you can associate a learning objective, let's say, with a quiz question.
That would be great. Thank you so much.
Sure. Here we go.
So maybe before you even get started, just recap, from our last session, you showed us just real quickly the standards tool. And just FYI, for those that are here, we got an understanding of the difference between, say, a standard and a learning outcome. But there is this tool or feature in D2L that allows you to set standards for your course and then measure them across. And then what you can do, as what I understood from our first session, was connect, for example, quizzes to specific metrics or standards. So that's what I was asking Paul, if you could show us a little bit about that process. Actually, and I think most people are going to be using quizzes. So let's do quizzes as an example today.
Sure, yeah. So what Craig's talking about is the standards tool here. So if you navigate to course admin under assessments, you select the standards tool, and this is a tool you can use to import any standards that exist at the program level, or you can add standards at the course level. So once you've created your standards for the course, or you've imported standards from at the program level, you'll see those standards listed here. And then if you want to associate specific standards to an assessment tool like the quiz tool, for example, what we can do is we can navigate to the quiz tool. So we'll go back to the course admin, we'll open up the quizzes. And let me see, you can do this when you create a quiz, or once you've created a quiz, you can go back to edit the quiz. And then from this editing window, you will see, I hope you can see what I'm seeing here. So you have the questions. I only have two. This is just a test quiz. I have two quiz questions here. So let's say I want to associate both of these questions to a standards in my course. So I would select all. Then right at the top here, right above the questions, I have the more actions. And then drop down menu, I would select align to standards. Okay. So I don't remember, I guess there are no standards aligned now. So when you go to align standards, all of your standards that are in your course that you've imported or created will show up, and then you select whichever standards you want to align to those quiz questions. So I'm just going to randomly select the two standards at the top here and select save. And then you will see those standards appear right below both of these questions. But like I said, you can align standards to individual questions, or you can align a standard to all of the questions.
So just to also remind folks from the first session, if you have worked as a department or even on your own course outline, well, on your course outline and or as a department, to create learning outcomes or certain standards you want to be measuring in your course, this is the feature that you would be using to sort of connect them perhaps at the quiz level. So maybe as a unit, you have decided that we want our students to be able to demonstrate or to remember X, let's just say, or list X. And then in your course, you're responsible for actually verifying that students can do that. So maybe they've assigned your course, like make sure that students can do this by the end of your course. And you could build in then an assessment of that skill. And then if your course supervisors or your school director were to ask you how many students met those standards, we could run a report for you. So this is why setting up like a quiz and then connecting them to specific standards could be very valuable for you. One, you would know as an instructor at the course level whether students are achieving the learning outcomes. But second, at the sort of programmatic level, you could also be validating that students are meeting these objectives across the curriculum. So this is the feature that I think is most vital for you all.
Yeah, and Craig also mentioned the class progress tool. So that's a tool you can use to check the learner's progress across the standards that you're across the standards that you're associating to assessments in the course. So let's navigate to the class progress tool, which is under learner management. So I'm going to select test student. So I'm going to make this bigger so that you can see. So these are the trackable. So these are all the categories that the class progress tool tracks. And you see here the quizzes is being tracked. So you can track obviously students' progress across the quizzes in the course. You also see the standards here. So when you select standards, you can see all of these standards in my course. Now, these haven't been assessed, so it says not assessed. But when you go into evaluate well, the quiz is auto-graded, but so when a student completes the quiz, and if there's, if there is short answer questions in the quiz, you go in, you manually grade those. Then you have the opportunity to also determine based on a predetermined achievement scale that's determined at the program level. You can also use that achievement scale to determine whether the student has achieved those standards that you aligned to that quiz or not. And then if they have, they will show up here as assessed, passed, or not passed.
Paul, is there a quick way to see that at the sort of course level for all students? Like if I wanted to see not each individual student's sort of standard accomplishments, but here's the aggregate of how well students are performing. Is that possible?
At the course level?
Yeah. So like, for example, is there anywhere in there when I go to class progress that it gives me an aggregate of all students, like say 80% of them have, maybe that's where we're going to get into the examples of using not release conditions, but what's the word I'm looking for? The intelligent agents. Because I think on the back end of intelligent agents, I could run that, but is there any way that just on the dashboard here that I click on it and it shows me the progress in the aggregate, I guess, yeah.
Right, I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing it here, so I don't believe.
So that would be student to student, right?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah,
so
okay, great.
But I can look into that if you can see an aggregate report of. I'm sure you can run a report. So I think you would have to do that at an assessment level basis.
Okay, which we can do, or it is possible to do through intelligent agents, and that's what you're covering next week, correct?
Yes, I will cover intelligent agents next week.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so back to the presentation. So we have 10 minutes left, and where did we leave off? Formative assessments, summative assessment. Greg,
yeah, you were down by Bloom's taxonomy there. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Do you think I was going to cover quickly some tools like the assignments, the discussions tool, and the video assignment tool that can be used for summative assessments, and go a little bit into providing feedback. I realize that we're a bit short on time. I don't know if there will be enough question and answer.
Yeah, I think we could open it up to maybe some Q&A. Yeah,
now?
So yeah, I think so. Why not? And we can send out the slides. I think generally speaking, most folks kind of have a general sense of this. And like last week, I think most were showing for a demonstration of the specific features and tools to connect them. So that's why I kind of directed it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was just getting some assessment feedback, so to speak, in the chat. So that's, yeah, we can do some Q&A, but I think like if there's some questions for folks where they're struggling with, that might be helpful use of their time. We do have a question here. It says, I can see the progress of each student in the class, including the percentage of content completed by each student. Okay, so thanks, Anas. That's helpful feedback. So he's showing that when you have multiple students in a class, it has given you the aggregate data.
The class progress tool?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, so we're opening this up for some Q&A, folks.
Let me stop sharing. Yeah, and there is several resources that I've included there at the end. So when you do share the slideshow, feel free to use those resources to learn, get more information, and get more into the details of how to use these tools for assessment purposes.
you want, you can type your questions in the chat or unmute yourself and ask. I guess one thing I would ask the audience, for those of you that are using quizzes heavily, Paul did say that you could import questions into D2L through a CSV. Paul, do you have any literature on how to actually set up the CSV so that it imports well and correctly? We do have a subscription to Respondus, so I know some instructors use that, but I think that's a great tool to set up question groups. And so if you all are interested that are on the call, I can set up a training specifically with Respondus to show us how to set up and use their tool. But do you have a resource, Paul, specifically on how to set up the CSV file for import?
Let me make a note of that. I don't have one handy, but I can look into it.
Yeah, so Jennifer Karan is asking, yeah, more on the imported quizzes would be helpful. Yeah. Yeah, I think that would be really helpful because as programs might want to assess students, but not give them the same questions, right? They could set up groups essentially for this group of questions aligns with this learning outcome. And then you might deploy, say, out of the 10 questions, randomize it, and this students would receive 3 of those 10 questions. So it really elevates sort of your ability to stop, cheating if that's a concern, but also get more detailed feedback in different ways, whether a question is good and so forth. Yeah. Is there a way to see feedback the students will see at the end of the quiz? For example, the feedback you mentioned. Chris, maybe unmute and ask the question because I'm not 100% sure I understand that question.
Yeah, no problem. There's a lot of options with quizzes, and I was wondering, you mentioned that we can provide, I think, hints and also provide predefined feedback. Like, for example, if they got a question wrong on the quiz, you could say, oh, well, that was incorrect, reference some page in the book or something for an additional guide, So I was just wondering, is there a way to be able to, view the quiz and see what the student would get from the whole quiz, so I could maybe do like a print before and just kind of review it before I hit publish, and make sure that everything looks good.
Yeah, I'm looking at the quiz editor. You should be able to, when you go to edit a quiz, there is evaluation and feedback section there, and then you have this option to customize quiz result displays.
Okay.
So I think the question is, once he's done that, so he's set that up, is there a way to then just get a quick view of it? I believe, and I'll double check on this, but you can actually take the quiz like you're a student. So you can do a test run, but then again, if you have a lot of different questions coming out that might not give you. So I think what he's looking for, Paul, and Christopher can correct me if I'm wrong, is like I can just sort of print as a PDF and it gives me a view of like what the experience would be. So, here's the question, here's the right answer, here's the feedback to the student. So they don't have to click through all of the questions again in D2L.
Craig, that's
Right.
exactly it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I don't know if there is an option where you can see it like that and you can print it that I'm aware of. Like you said, Craig, you could preview the quiz and maybe take a screenshot, but you can only see.
Yeah, that would be pretty cumbersome. Let me look into that,
Yeah.
Christopher. I'll talk to D2L, and if not, say that's something they might want to put on their roadmap for sure.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions for Paul while we have him? I do have one question, Paul, since I teach in a field that uses the, Bongo. So is it possible, or is this all going to be more of a summative feedback. Can you have, if you develop like a quiz in it, like the quiz questions are tied to the learning outcomes specifically? Or is it more of a holistic review of the video that's submitted? Does that make sense?
So using Bongo, can you?
Like tie like let's say I'm doing a kind of a quiz or a poll inside that tool. Can I tie that specifically to an assessment tool or learning outcome tool?
Yeah, I'm not too sure whether you can do that. I will have to
Okay.
look into.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah.
Yeah, because currently how I do it is just kind of I do an assessment after I've watched their entire video, but it'd be great if I was like measuring, say, nonverbals in their presentations, and that was automatically tied to a score on the back end, but I don't know if that's possible. Okay, well, I think we're about at time here, so I know everybody's got to run probably to their next thing at noon. We greatly appreciate your time joining us today. As I said, there is a video from last week's session. There's going to be this video, and then next week, Paul and I will work together to develop the next one on programmatic level assessment. Hopefully you'll be able to attend that. He will cover how to use intelligent agents, which I think is a great way to get quick feedback on learner performance. And then if everything is done right from beginning to end, we can always run a report for you here in the CTE to give you whatever assessment data you need. What's happening is a lot of times people are setting up assessments and then not sticking to them, or they're not using them across their curriculum. And then we can't really get useful reports when that happens. So want to talk to you a little bit about that. Thank you all for joining us today. We do hope that you enjoyed it, and we hope that you have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you, Paul, for joining us too.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
cheers. Bye-bye.